Hello and welcome to week 3. My name is Dr. Cherie Johnson, and we're going to talk a little bit about emotional intelligence. And this slide that you're looking at right here explains what we're doing in week 3 and why it matters for your work in human resource management. We're focusing on self management, meaning what you do with your emotions in real time, not just what you know about them. In HR, people watch your behavior under pressure, so your emotional intelligence shows up in observable actions like staying calm, listening well, choosing your words carefully, and responding instead of reacting. This week, I want you to connect those behaviors to outcomes you care about in the workplace. That includes stronger performance, more credible leadership, healthier team dynamics, and a more stable organizational climate. As you move through the week, keep asking yourself one simple question. What would someone be able to observe in me that signals emotional intelligence, especially when things get stressful? And that's an important question, okay? This slide builds directly on week three's introduction that you just saw. First, in part one, we want to start with emotions in contemporary HRM. The key idea is that HR practices do not just manage policies, they shape how people feel at work. Now, we'll look at how common HR decisions can increase engagement or unintentionality contribute to exhaustion and emotional strain. Then in part two, we shift to observable EI behaviors. I want you to think like an HR professional who has to assess what is actually happening, not what people intend. We'll focus on behaviors you can see in daily work, like how someone communicates under pressure, responds to feedback, or handles conflict. Finally, part three connects it all to self management and outcomes. This is where we get practical. You'll learn tactics you can apply immediately to improve judgment, strengthen leadership effectiveness, and support a healthier team climate. As you go through this week, keep one thread in mind. We're moving from emotions to behaviors to outcomes so you can make better people decisions in real workplaces. Okay, and moving right along. Taking a look at this slide, first, you should be able to explain how emotions shape perception, judgment, and decisions in HRM. In other words, HR decisions are rarely purely logical. Emotions influence what people notice, how they interpret fairness, and how they respond to policies and leaders. Second, you should be able to identify observable EI behaviors that support performance and leadership effectiveness. I want you thinking in behaviors, not labels. What does self management look like in a meeting, during conflict, or under pressure? Third, you should be able to evaluate how HR practices influence positive emotions, exhaustion, and engagement. This is where you connect HR systems to the employee experience. You'll consider how practices like feedback, workload expectations, and recognition shape motivation and burnout. Finally, you should be able to use self management routines to improve communication quality and workplace outcomes. This is the application piece. The goal is for you to leave this week with strategies you can actually use to communicate more effectively, regulate stress responses, and contribute to a healthier climate at work, which is very important. Always want to make sure we have a healthy climate in the workplace. For looking at this slide, first, Phyllis and Weiss focus on developing emotional intelligence. As you work through it, look for practical strategies you can apply, especially around self management and how EI can intentionally strengthen over time. Second, Africa Jr. and colleagues connect Goldman's intrapersonal dimension of EI to effective leadership. When you read this one, pay attention to the internal skills leaders must manage, such as self awareness and self regulation, and how those show up in leadership decisions and credibility. Third, colleagues focus on the importance of emotions in contemporary human resource management. This helps you connect emotions to HR systems and practices, including engagement, exhaustion, and climate. By the end of the week, you should be able to pull at least one key idea from each article and use it to justify an HR decision, a leadership response, or a self management tactic you plan to test. So, looking at the next slide here, the reading calls this the emotional paradigm in human resources management. That means HR practices should be designed with the employee emotional experience in mind, not as an afterthought. What you implement, how you communicate it, and how consistently you apply it can either build trust and energy or create frustration and withdrawal. On the right side, here is the key mechanism the research tested. Human resources management practices influence engagement indirectly through two pathways. Positive emotions increase engagement while exhaustion reduces it. So, when you elevate an HR practice, I want you to ask two practical questions. Does this practice increase positive emotion and does it reduce exhaustion? Those two answers will help you predict whether engagement will rise or fall. So, in taking a look at this next slide, start on the left side with inputs. These are the practices employees feel day to day, such as role clarity and fairness, supportive supervision, growth and feedback, work design and workload, and the signals compensation sense. These are not neutral. Each one communicates value, priorities, and expectations. In the middle is employee experience, the emotional and energy response to those inputs. Strong HR practices tend to increase positive emotions, meaning trust, belonging, and psychological safety. Weak or inconsistent practices tend to increase stress and exhaustion. This middle column matters because it explains why the same policy can produce very different results depending on how it's delivered. On the right are the outcomes, what you can observe in the workplace. When the middle column is healthy, you typically see higher engagement and retention, better performance in citizenship behaviors, stronger team dynamics, more effective leadership, and a healthier organizational climate. When the middle column is unhealthy, those outcomes usually decline. As you work through this week, practice tracing a straight line from one specific HR input to one employee experience to one outcome that you would like to see. Okay, moving on to this next slide. First, look at self awareness in action. A self aware person can name what they're feeling early, not after the situation escalates. They notice their triggers and patterns, especially in meetings where pressure shows up quickly. They also seek feedback and compare their self view with how others experience them. Most importantly, they align decisions with stated values and standards so their behavior matches what they say they believe. Now, look at self management in action. This is what self awareness looks like when pressure hits. You will see tone, control, short pauses before responding, and professional boundaries that don't turn into shutting down or withdrawing. You'll also see recovery, meaning that after a tense moment, they can reset and return to a steady baseline instead of carrying the stress into the next conversation. As you think like an HR professional, ask yourself one practical question. If I observe someone struggling one of these areas, what would I coach them to do differently in the next 24 hours? Good question. Clicking on to the next screen. Okay, we're moving from awareness to behavior. First, look at the internal strategies. These are the tools you use within your body and mind. Start by regulating physical reactions because your breath, posture, and pace often signal stress before your words do. Next, prepare for predictable situations. If you already know what typical triggers are, you plan your response before you walk into the meeting. Finally, use reflection and recovery. I want you to hear the difference between rest and true recovery. Recovery restores your capacity to think clearly and respond well, not just a pause in activity. Now, look at the external strategies. These are the tools you use in your environment and in your interactions. Build accountability so your intentions turn into follow through. In HR work, good intentions without consistent behavior break trust quickly. Seek to understand others' perspectives before acting, especially when the issue is emotional or high stakes. After stress or conflict, strive for clarity. Do not assume people know what you mean. Clarify expectations, decisions, and next steps so that the team can move forward. As you apply this, pick one internal strategy and one external strategy to test this week. Then ask yourself, what will people observe that tells them my self management is actually improving? Go to the next slide here. So, when we're looking at evidence from an applied setting, first, look at the study snapshot. This research comes from the Ghanaian banking industry and uses a cross sectional survey design. The sample included 260 employees from four commercial banks, and the analysis used hierarchical multiple regression. That matters because regression helps us estimate how strongly EI relates to leadership effectiveness while accounting for other factors. Now, focus on the key findings. The study reports a significant positive relationship between self awareness and leadership effectiveness. It also reports a significant positive relationship between self management and leadership effectiveness. In plain terms, leaders who recognize and regulate their emotions tend to be rated as more effective. The final point is important for HR decision making. Demographics such as gender, age, education, and tenure influence these relationships. So when we apply EI development in organizations, we should not assume one approach works the same way for everyone. This is where HR comes in, designing support and development that is equitable, context aware, and responsive to the workforce. As you think about your own workplace, I want you to ask yourself one question. If I improve just one self awareness behavior or one self management behavior, what would people notice first in my leadership effectiveness? That's a really good question. What would they think of first? Okay. What model suggests for HR decisions? First, notice the model that was tested. The study used structural equation modeling, supported by confirmatory factor analysis, with a large sample of about 1,000 employees. That's important because SEM lets researchers test relationships among multiple variables at the same time, including indirect effects, not just simple one to one correlations. The main takeaway is this: human resources management had a robust effect on two emotional pathways, positive emotions and exhaustion. So, engagement is not just about motivation, it is also about the emotional experience HR helps produce through policies, workload design, supervision practices, and fairness. Now look at the implications. The first implication is proactive. Design HR systems that reliably increase positive emotions, not just occasional morale boosts. Think clarity, support, development, recognition, and fair treatment that employees experience consistently. The second implication is a mindset shift. Exhaustion is not only an individual resilience issue, it's also an HR outcome that can be influenced through workload, expectations, staffing, role clarity, and recovery norms. Finally, pay attention to context. The effects were stronger in large organizations and in the public sector. That means HR decisions should be tailored to organizational size and sector rather than assuming a one size fits all approach. As you reflect, ask yourself this: in your workplace, what is one HR practice that reliably increases positive emotion? And what is one practice that quietly increases exhaustion? Okay. High stakes conversation. Okay. First, performance feedback. Okay. Your goal is to lower threat and raise clarity. Set a calm pace. Name the standard we are working toward and focus on observable behavior and impact. Before deciding on next steps, ask the employee's interpretation so you respond to the real issue, not your first assumption. Second, selection and interviews. EI is here about EI, emotional intelligence is about separating signal from emotion. Track your own reactions and potential biases as you gather evidence. Use structured questions so every candidate is evaluated consistently, and close the loop with clean documentation so decisions are defensible and transparent. Third, conflict mediation. The win is slow escalation early. Before positions harden, restate each side's needs accurately to show understanding and reduce defensiveness. Then move the conversation towards shared interests and end with one clear next action step and one follow up check in so the agreement becomes behavior, not just words. As you apply this, pick one of these HR moments you have experienced and identify one emotional intelligence move from the list that would have changed the outcome. If you were to do this, one of these three things, how would that have changed the outcome? Why observable EI scales? When leaders manage their own reactions, they reduce the emotional noise that blocks problem solving. That matters because teams do better work when trust is higher, and people don't have to spend energy managing tension, defensiveness, or uncertainty. HR also plays a direct role here. When HR systems reinforce positive emotion and reduce exhaustion, engagement becomes sustainable. In other words, good HR design helps people bring consistent energy and focus to their work over time. On the right side, I want you to track what improvement looks like in real life. You should see fewer recovery days after meetings. You should hear more direct feedback without people getting defensive. You should notice faster conflict repair, clearer decisions, and a stronger willingness to speak up and take initiative. As you reflect, pick one team you know well. Which of these signals would tell you the climate is improving, and which would tell you the climate is slipping? We'll move on to the next slide. All right, here's a scenario. You're in a performance conversation on a high workload team. The employee becomes defensive, claims the process is unfair, and questions your credibility. The goal is not to win the argument, it is to stay regulated, protect the relationship, and still move the performance issue forward. Step one is to observe. Identify what you feel in the moment and name the trigger. For example, you might notice frustration, embarrassment, or the urge to defend yourself. Just naming it helps you slow down and choose your next move on purpose. Step two is to regulate. Choose one self management tactic and apply it immediately. That might be a short pause before responding, lowering your tone, controlling your pace, or taking a steady breath. Your regulation keeps the conversation from escalating. Step three is to decide how to refrain. Bring the conversation back to the standard, the support you will provide, and the next steps. You can acknowledge the employee's concern without debating it. Then restate the expectation, describe the observable behavior and impact, and invite their interpretation so you can problem solve. Step four is to follow through. Decide what you'll document and what you'll follow up on. Document facts, expectations, actions, and timelines. Then schedule a check in so the employee sees consistency and the process stays fair and clear. As you work, I want you to write a short response for each step as if you are the HR professional in the room. As we wrap up, I want you to have three takeaways. First, emotions are not soft variables. They shape judgment, effort, engagement, and even how people interpret fairness. If we ignore emotions, we miss a major driver of performance and turnover. Second, emotional intelligence becomes practical when you translate it into observable behaviors. That means focusing on what you can see and hear, such as tone, pacing, listening, documentation habits, how you give feedback, and how you respond under pressure. Third, self management is trainable. You do not have to wait until you're in a crisis to improve it. The best HR professionals build routines that keep them steady in high stakes moments like coaching, discipline, interviews, and conflict mediation. For practice next week, I want you to try a simple 5-day emotion log after meetings that matter. Keep it short and consistent. Write the trigger, the emotional label, the body signal you noticed, the action you took, and the outcome you got. Then choose one self management strategy to strengthen this week and track it daily. Pick something specific and repeatable, like pausing before you respond, lowering your tone, slowing your pace, or doing a quick reset before a difficult conversation. The goal is to progress through repetition, not perfection. Okay? And that brings us to the end of week 3. These are your references and the assigned readings. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to email me, or we can set up a call to where I can answer your questions. Okay. And I will see you in the next lesson. Thank you.